Welcome to drawing hands. Now this tutorial about how to draw hands are the basic understandings of the features of the human anatomy that we would like to take further in terms of character designing and animation later. Now, why it is relevant and important to understand the human anatomy is that people have a tendency to only see the outline of objects and even features of the human body and only draw the outlines without understanding the importance and the relevance of understanding the structure, volume, and mass of what those things are made up out of in order to be able to represent adequately. And with that being said, is if we, for example, look at the hands over here, a lot of people would try and draw hands and only try and draw an outline, but yet you can't just tend to draw an outline of the hands because firstly we don't know what the measurements and size of the hands are, and also we don't know what the volume of each of these fingers are. So how can you be able to determine the actual shape if you don't know what they consist out of? And not only is mass and volume very important with regards to drawing the human body, in this instance the hands, but very importantly so are angles. Now you'll constantly hear me saying with tutorials on drawing hands and feet and knees and the whole human body is inside out. Now with drawing inside out, it's not physically ripping the skin off of a person and drawing the inside, but it is looking at what the angles are of the features you're drawing and looking at what they consist of and the structure to be able to draw the features. Now, importantly, if we look at, for example, the hands over here, we are drawn by and guided by the angles of these particular fingers and hand. Now, if, for example, we look at where the arm is, we've got an angle here where the wrist is. We've got a center line on the hand towards where the middle finger knuckle is, and then we've got an angle on the knuckle line. We've got a secondary angle of the bend of the fingers, angle on the bend of the fingers, and edge of the fingers. Now, we have to also consider, we have to draw hands and feet normally bigger than what we are, because we've got a tendency to go very small when you start to draw fingers, especially the focus on fingernails, which is something you will always include right at the end. But what you do when you start off in understanding the actual structure of the hand in this instance is from the wrist, you've got an angle from the wrist towards the bend on the knuckles, angle towards the bend on the thumb, and edge of the thumb. Now, if we look at a trajectory angle on the edge of the thumb, you will see that the thumb relates to the bend on the fingers over here. So if we, for example, were to continue this arch, you will see that the arch in relation from the thumb is aligned to the bend on the fingers. Now, importantly, every single time you were to draw any feature of the person or of an animal is looking at where the angles are of your features, where they actually bend, and what the structures are. So if we, for example, now have looked at the center line over here on wrist to middle finger, we then look at what is the angle from that knuckle to the bend on the middle finger, bend on the middle finger, edge. Same thing we do with the index finger, looking at the bend on the thumb that we've already got, ring finger, bend, edge, and pinky to the edge. What we then will start to do is we will then start to build up the actual volume from the inside out, looking at from the structure of the knuckles towards the edges of the fingers. If we, for example, look at this hand over here, we can see that, again, there are angles towards where the actual features of the hand is aligned, the inside structure. We also see the bend on the knuckles, but very importantly in this instance is we see that the features over here are foreshortened. Same trajectory point happens and aligns to the thumb as indicated previously, but what is very important here is realizing what the actual structure of the fingers are. Now in that instance, you'll see with the examples that I will show you is we need to be able to look at from the angle, center point of the fingers, is look at the angles of the bend of the fingers, how and where they bend, and then very importantly is looking at what the actual structure of the knuckles are. Now you'll see that a lot of the times I'm pulling my lines around the volumes. Now what those lines are, which are these lines over here, those lines are lines that go around the tonal value, which is the actual shading of the hand, which will help you in terms of line work later when you do tonal value. You need to be able to indicate what the actual structures are and the direction of line to guide you when you do tonal value, which will be the direction of your line work for tonal value. If I were to take this reference away of the image of the hand and just have you see what the line work would represent, that is what your lines would look like in the beginning when you actually start to draw a hand, which is like this. If you look at the drawing as you have it here, now you can see that we've actually started to build up the structure of the fingers. You can see where the knuckles are, you can see where the bends are, you can see where the bend of the fingers are in alignment to the angles. You can see the wrist, you can see the cushion area on the edge of the hand. But very importantly here is that nothing gives you an outline. It gives you the structures from inside out to be able to build an accurate hand at the end. And now we'll show you how we actually take this understanding further in different angles and building up the hand. So if we now start to look at building the hand from our understanding as I've just shown you, is if we consider an angle of the hand and we consider the angle of the arm, bend of the hand, and we can look at an angle from the center line of the hand towards, in this instance, because of the angle, it would be more or less that of the ring finger. Angle of where I want the knuckles to be attached to the bridge of the hand. Angle, I want the knuckles on the bend of the fingers to be first bend, second bend, edge. And then I would like to indicate the rough width of the hand. So because this is going to be the edge of the hand over here, I'm going to look at an angle that I want my pinky to come in, bend, bend, edge, ring finger, angle, bend, edge. Then looking at angle, bend, down, and I want the index finger to bend over there, and the edge. And what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to apply the same principle of building inside out. So starting off with the pinky is looking at the structure that I want to have the knuckle on the bend of that pinky. You can see my lines moving across the bridge of the finger as a whole, moving to the edge of the volume to the side, down to the next bend of that finger. This now is the front part of the pinky. On here I've got volume on the edge of that finger pulling down, bend on that finger, and then I've got edge of that finger. Here I've got the cushion area on the hand pulling in. It is broader because it's on the bridge and on the edge of the hand, so the pinky will look a little bit broader than what it naturally is. Then moving towards the ring finger, now you can see that there's a space between the pinky and the ring finger. So the space is a little bit bigger, meaning that there will be a negative space in between, and the skin will actually pull on the hand. So you can look at that skin pull on the side, but yet on this bend, I've got again this knuckle structure moving across that finger. On this angle, it moves to the edge of the finger on my ring finger over here. I conclude what that structure is, moving to the front of the finger, edge towards the knuckle, and I've got the front part of the finger. Now there's a little bit of a flesh area on the side. This fleshy area moves towards where the finger actually bends towards the pinky. Now we look at the bend on the knuckle for the next adjacent finger, which is our middle finger. We look at the actual bones on the inside over here, moving across from that finger, edge, the bend of that knuckle, cross, bend on that finger, down, edge, cross, looking at volume, edge of that finger, and looking at front of the finger. Now we can see that this is going to move a little bit more closer, edge, and now we've got the index finger. Now you can see the index finger is slightly bent more than what the other fingers are, lifting up a little bit higher, and that means this front knuckle on that index finger is going to be a little bit bigger than the knuckles of the rest because it's pointing upward. Angle towards the bend on that knuckle, across to the front. Now remember, as I've said, that those lines that pull across, you look at what the actual tonal value is, because that's how the fingers move according to the different shapes. This then moves to the front part of the arm, to the back, and there you have the basic placement of the fingers and the hand. Now, what you will then later start to do is build up tonal value, and to show you what the actual tonal values would be and why we indicate these lines, for example, pulling around. Keeping the same consistency with my pencil that I have here, is you would start to look at where your tonal values are, seeing edges of the fingers a little bit rounder, a little bit darker on the edges, and this gives you an indication already where to start to place your estimate of tonal values. And I'm just doing faint lines just so that you can see what these lines will actually start to represent when you actually start to define tonal value at a later stage. But all of this you start to build up with basic structuring and not seeing outlines, but rather inside out. Now, a different angle, looking at angle of the arm, angle of the wrist, angle of the center line on the hand, angle of the knuckles, then looking at angle that I want to have the middle finger, bend, angle, bend, edge, looking at the ring finger, where I want the bends to be, pinky, bend, and then the index finger coming out over here. So same principle accounts, looking at from the wrist, you've got a small triangular squared shape for the bridge of the hand, and then where you want the arm to come in. Same principle accounts that we're going to start to look at what the actual structuring is of each individual finger. Now, it is not knowing the anatomy per se of the bones and each and every single muscle of the fingers, but rather it is when you use references, i.e. people that you draw off of reference images, people you know that you draw, that you have live figures. It is looking at the structure and the volume and the tonal value that guide you what the inside areas are, not necessarily the anatomy, bone, muscle structure, because we're not all the same. So we'll need to be able to, yes, know what these features are in terms of shape, contour, and volume, but the same formula cannot be applied to every single person because we all differ. But you can see the same principle accounts as what I'm drawing here, as what I've shown you with the first instance, is the structuring of each and every single finger and looking at what the overall volumes are per finger and adjacent to one another. Looking at on the bend of the knuckles, how the bones pull to the top, on the bend of the knuckle, seeing edge, cross, turn, edge. Now over here, can you see, from what I've said, you always draw hands and feet bigger than what they are, because now you can see that this line over here is too big, because from this element I'm going to have the edge of this hand pull up, move across to the arm towards the wrist. From here, looking at index finger on the edge over here, this pulls up, wrist and hand. So same principle as mentioned is bend on the wrist, center line to the middle finger, angle to the ring finger, angle to pinky, angle to index finger, and angle to thumb. Now we look at middle finger, angle pulling down to the bend, and we look at bend of the fingers, bend on the fingers, and we look at the edge. So we look at center line again, we look at bend on ring finger, we're going to bend it inward, we can bend the pinky inward in this instance as well. Let's include a bigger gap between middle finger and index, bend, bend, edge, and then as mentioned, this is where the length of the thumb will be, normally in the middle of the knuckle, top bend to second bend of index finger, you have the center line of the thumb. So again, looking at volume on the knuckles over here, build up, structure on the inside, build up, volume across, turn, on the bend on the knuckle, next bend, volume in, and we have edge of the finger. Looking at moving towards the ring finger, we've got knuckle over here, pulling up to the hand. Finger is adjacent, so this knuckle is a little bit bigger. On this center line moving across, have the knuckle to the edge, volume around, it's attached to this finger and it just pulls in that way. Same with the pinky, we can then even, in this instance, let's maybe lift the pinky a little bit higher and have it pull in and bend in. So we have bend on the pinky knuckle over there, volume coming in, knuckle be a little bit smaller on the edge, but it is adjacent towards this ring finger. Structure, angle, pulling in, edge, edge of the finger. Again, we're going to have a negative space and gap in between the two fingers, but we look at knuckle structure, top, bottom, volume pulling up, adjacent, around the volume, to the knuckle, around that shape, in, knuckle pulling down, cross that finger, and edge. From here, we've got bend on that finger, bend on the negative space, volume around, and now there's a cushion area from the index finger towards the thumb. So what we now need to establish is what the bend of the thumb is, knuckle bend on the thumb, and how it comes out on the edge. So we've got the thumb, and we've got the big volume on the edge of that thumb. Structure on that knuckle pulls in. Here's the bend on the hand itself. And then we've got the edge of the thumb pulling in, turning point on the thumb, flat and adjacent, and there you'll have fingernail coming in. So on this angle over here, we've got edge of the wrist, cross, hand bending in and around. So same principle is if you do hold it outward, when you start to do your tonal value again, you are able to already estimate where the basic tonal values would be. And again, this is structuring, and it's understanding what the structures are, how the elements bend and how each one relates to one another, because nothing is independent of one another, nothing is standalone, but they all relate: angles, volumes, and widths. So if, for example, we were to look at the bend of an arm towards the wrist, and we look at the bend of the hand towards the middle finger, and we look at where the fingers will bend, and we look at placing the thumb coming out over here, we can see that we want to, for example, have our middle finger, want to have the relation to index finger. Let's have ring finger pull up, pulling in, edge of the hand. We want to have edge of the hand coming in, volume to the top. We then want to have where the index finger is coming out here, bend, bend of the fingers, edge of the fingers, angle, bend, angle for the middle finger, for the ring finger, and the pinky that will stick out over here, and we will have thumb coming in and the angle. And remember again, as I've mentioned, because this is foreshortened, the bend on the fingers here, because they are on an angle, this trajectory bend is the center bend of the finger to the thumb. Yet on the second bend, you now have size of the thumb. So that is, in terms of foreshortening now, the difference. So that in essence is the basic foundation understanding of drawing hands, looking at angles from wrist to center line of hand towards the knuckles, bend on the fingers, and length of fingers in relation to one another. I hope this helps, and I hope that this will give you insight into furthering your anatomically correct human figures to later characterize.